Crew ignores black woman's medical emergency, then discover she's a world-renowned surgeon. Picture a bustling airport where travelers from every corner of the globe gather in anticipation, excitement, or trepidation. Among them is a poised and understated black woman named Dr. Simone Aldridge, quietly reviewing her notes before a flight she's taken countless times. What the passengers and crew don't know, however, is that Simone's life is about to change forever, and so will theirs. In a matter of hours, she'll face a terrifying medical crisis, only to be disregarded and dismissed. But as the cabin's tension spirals out of control, one shocking truth will shatter their assumptions. Dr. Aldridge is no ordinary patient. She's one of the greatest surgeons in the world. Dr. Simone Aldridge found herself navigating the bustle of London Heathrow Airport, mentally preparing for a long flight back to Baltimore. Days earlier, she had delivered a keynote speech at a prestigious medical conference where she unveiled new techniques in reconstructive surgery, further solidifying her reputation as one of Johns Hopkins Hospital's rising stars. Although esteemed by peers worldwide, Simone remained unassuming, dressed in a smart blazer and sensible shoes that hinted at her practicality rather than her accolades. Before boarding, she paused at a cafe for a cup of ginger tea, a small ritual to steady her nerves. Despite countless flights over the years, she still felt a faint flutter of anxiety with each takeoff. Passing fellow travelers, businessmen in sharp suits, families shepherding restless children, elderly couples clutching passports, she found herself unusually sensitive to the human tapestry around her. Yet she could not shake an uneasy feeling, as though a hidden storm loomed in her path. When she finally settled into her business-class seat, the cabin's familiarity offered mild comfort. Simone went through her mental checklist, send last-minute emails, review her patient files, and rest if she could. A flight attendant named Charlotte greeted her politely, handing over the in-flight menu. Everything seemed typical until a sudden, inexplicable tension gripped Simone. She blamed it on exhaustion, but a subtle voice in her mind told her otherwise. As the plane roared down the runway, Simone clenched the armrests, heart pounding. Ordinarily, she would distract herself by thinking of her upcoming surgeries, especially the complex case of a teenage car accident survivor waiting for her skilled hands. But today, even those comforting images could not dispel her foreboding. The moment the aircraft lifted into the sky, Simone caught her breath, trying to dismiss the jolt of dread as mere turbulence. Little did she know that her life would soon hang in the balance, and her cries for help would be met with a troubling lack of urgency. Unbeknownst to those around her, Dr. Simone Aldridge, celebrated surgeon and quiet trailblazer, was about to face the kind of emergency that no one, not even the most brilliant doctor, could ever confront alone. Once airborne, a flight attendant came by with a polite smile. "Welcome aboard," she said, handing Simone a menu of lunch options. Her name tag read Charlotte, and she had the practiced grace of someone who dealt with thousands of passengers. Simone nodded politely, "Thank you." Beside Simone, across the aisle, sat a middle-aged man wearing a sharp suit and reading a business journal. A mother with a toddler a few rows ahead tried to keep her child entertained with a coloring book. Behind Simone, an elderly couple quietly chatted about their upcoming holiday in the United States. The cabin settled into that familiar hush of a long-haul flight, people reading, sleeping, or staring off with that introspective glaze. Despite the calm atmosphere, Simone couldn't shake an unsettling feeling in the pit of her stomach. It wasn't exactly fear, more like an anticipatory twinge. She chalked it up to fatigue and dehydration. Airplane cabins were notoriously dry, so she reached for a bottle of water, sipped, and forced herself to relax. Not long after, Charlotte made her rounds again, offering drinks and snacks. Simone requested another glass of water. When Charlotte handed it over, Simone caught a subtle flicker in the attendant's eyes, perhaps curiosity, perhaps something else. Simone was used to it. Many strangers found her complexion and refined accent incongruous. She expected curiosity, but she never jumped to conclusions that it was anything else. Halfway through the in-flight lunch, Simone noticed a mild headache forming. She was prone to migraines when stressed, but she rarely let them slow her down. Typically, she'd pop a couple of ibuprofen and continue. Yet this headache felt different, sharper, accompanied by a strange, pulsating sensation behind her eyes. She pushed her half-eaten meal aside, took a breath, and tried to focus on the in-flight magazine to distract herself. The words swam on the page. She blinked a few times, frustration mounting. The throbbing became a crescendo. Determined not to cause a stir, Simone decided to close her eyes, figuring a brief nap might ward off the migraine. She switched off her overhead light, reclined her seat slightly, and draped a thin airline blanket over her legs. She tried to let her mind drift, but the throbbing only intensified. She felt a sudden wave of dizziness, as though the cabin tilted. Quick to check her seatbelt was secured, she opened her eyes and saw that everything was normal. Passengers were quietly watching movies, reading or dozing. The plane itself seemed steady. A bead of sweat formed on her brow. Her breathing felt shallow, and she had a strange sensation of her heart beating erratically. Alarm bells started going off in her mind. She wasn't anxious for no reason. Something was off physically. Simone reached for the call button, but her hand trembled. That alone startled her. Her hands rarely shook unless she was under extreme duress. Charlotte reappeared, leaning over Simone's seat. "Is there anything I can get for you?" she asked, somewhat mechanically. Simone managed a faint smile. "I don't feel well," she said softly. "Could I get some ice, or maybe a cold towel? I'm feeling a bit faint." Charlotte's polite smile faltered for an instant, as if searching Simone's face for cues. "I see. I'll be right back." Minutes passed, and those minutes stretched uncomfortably. When Charlotte finally returned, she offered a small plastic cup with a few ice chips. "We don't have cold towels in this class," Charlotte explained. "First class might, but they're a bit busy right now. Here you go." Simone accepted the ice. The unsympathetic tone stung. She could have pressed the issue, but she was too focused on her own growing discomfort. She pressed the cold cup against her temple, hoping it might quell the pulsating pain. Suddenly her vision doubled. She blinked, but the images refused to align. Her heart raced. Simone recognized the symptoms of a severe migraine with aura, possibly complicated by the cabin pressure. She realized she needed medication, and quickly. She had some emergency medication in her carry-on, but rummaging for it felt overwhelming in that moment, especially with her trembling hands and wavering vision. Her breathing turned shallow, each inhale a Herculean effort. Alarmed, she tried to calm herself, employing the same breathing techniques she taught her patients to manage pain. But something was definitely wrong. Her left arm tingled and her chest felt unbearably tight. "This can't be happening," Simone thought, panic seizing her. She knew the signs of a potential cardiac issue: chest tightness, radiating pain, breathing difficulties. She was in her early 40s, healthy, with no known cardiac issues, but life had no regard for convenience or fairness. She looked around, feeling increasingly helpless, and pressed the call button again. "Charlotte, please," she gasped when the attendant reappeared. "I need urgent help. This is not just a headache. I'm a physician. I recognize the signs of something serious. I suspect it might be my heart." Charlotte seemed taken aback. She blinked rapidly, her expression torn between skepticism and mild concern. "I can check if we have some medication," she said uncertainly. "We have a standard first aid kit." "Please, get me oxygen," Simone said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I think I need supplemental oxygen immediately. Charlotte's reaction was delayed, as though the request were too extraordinary. Her eyes flickered. Perhaps she was simply untrained in dealing with a passenger, describing potential heart trouble. Or perhaps she was used to people exaggerating their ailments to get attention or an upgrade. Regardless, her next words were coated in polite dismissiveness. "I'll talk to my supervisor." With that, Charlotte left again. Simone's breath caught in her throat. She tried to stand, to make her way toward any other crew member who would help, but her legs felt weak. Sinking back into her seat, she pressed a hand against her chest, forcing herself to stay calm. "They're ignoring me," a voice inside her hissed. She knew flight attendants had protocols for emergencies. Usually, they'd move swiftly if a passenger reported chest pains or difficulty breathing. So why the delay? Drenched in sweat, Simone closed her eyes, riding another wave of dizziness. She prayed she could hold on until someone competent intervened. 10 minutes passed, perhaps more. Time blurred. Finally, a different flight attendant approached. This was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a tense smile. His name tag read Rodney. Behind him hovered Charlotte, wearing an uneasy expression. "What seems to be the problem?" Rodney asked, his voice carefully controlled. "I'm experiencing severe chest pains and shortness of breath," Simone managed. She tried to maintain authority in her tone, though her voice trembled. "I may be having a cardiac event." Charlotte cut in. "I told my supervisor, you said you're a doctor. Maybe you can figure out what's happening?" Simone shot a sharp look at Charlotte. She couldn't fathom the insensitivity. "I need oxygen and possibly access to an AED if this worsens. Someone needs to monitor my vitals." Her voice shook, partly from fear, partly from indignation. "Every second counts if this is a serious event." Rodney hesitated. "We have emergency protocols, but let me see if we have a medical professional on board who can attend to you." That set off warning bells. "I'm telling you, I'm a medical professional specifically. A surgeon," Simone pressed, her frustration rising. "But I can't treat myself in this condition. I need immediate support." Rodney nodded but seemed unconvinced. "I'll see if there's a doctor on board who can assist. Meanwhile, I have to inform the captain. We'll see what we can do." As he left, Simone felt her face flush. The disrespect was astonishing. She recognized the subtle undertones, like she had to prove her credentials, to prove her worthiness of serious attention. The sharp pain in her chest flared again, and her fingers felt cold, tingly. She focused on her breathing, drawing on every ounce of professional knowledge to stabilize her vitals. Minutes later, an overhead announcement crackled. "If there is a doctor or medical professional on board, please identify yourself to the cabin crew immediately." Simone stared at the call button overhead. Her vision swirled again, making the panel blur. She considered pressing it once more, but felt too exhausted. Around her, passengers began murmuring, looking around. She noticed the curious eyes of the man across the aisle, who watched her with an unreadable expression. A few rows down, a woman stood. She wore a neat blouse and a watch that looked like it cost a month's salary for most people. She approached the flight attendants who were huddled in the galley area. After a brief exchange, the woman made her way to Simone. "Hello, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Davenport," the woman said, voice tinged with caution. "I heard the announcement. Are you the passenger needing help?" Simone nodded, her breathing shallow. "Yes, thank you. I'm Dr. Simone Aldridge. The first specialize in surgery, but right now, I think I need help. I'm having severe chest pain, difficulty breathing, dizziness, possible cardiac involvement." She forced the words through gritted teeth as she fought another wave of pain. Elizabeth placed her fingers on Simone's wrist, checking her pulse. Simone could see the practiced calm in her eyes. "Your pulse is irregular," Elizabeth confirmed. "We need to get you oxygen and possibly attach you to the plane's automated external defibrillator, just in case." She turned to Charlotte, who hovered uncertainly nearby. "Bring the oxygen tank, now. And get me the AED kit." Charlotte's face paled. She glanced over her shoulder to Rodney, who offered a hesitant nod. "I'll grab it," Charlotte said, disappearing at once, finally showing a sense of urgency. Within a minute, Charlotte returned with a small oxygen cylinder and a mask. Elizabeth swiftly placed the mask over Simone's nose and mouth, adjusting the flow. Simone felt a rush of relief as the pure oxygen poured into her lungs. Yet her chest remained tight and her head pounded. The next moments were a blur of checks and hushed instructions. "Doctor," Davenport asked Simone about her medical history, her last physical exam, any known allergies or previous episodes. Simone answered as best as she could, but each breath took monumental effort. Passengers nearby looked on with concern. An older woman offered words of comfort. Another passenger asked if they should move out of the seat, but the flight attendants told them to remain seated for the time being. The tension in the cabin rose tangibly, a collective hush that hung over the entire aisle. "Let's check her blood pressure," Elizabeth instructed, glancing at Charlotte again. There should be a blood pressure cuff in the emergency kit. Charlotte scrambled to retrieve it, as Dr. Davenport wrapped the cuff around Simone's arm. Simone locked eyes with her, silently willing the reading to be normal. The cuff tightened, beeped, and then displayed a reading that made Elizabeth's eyebrows shoot up. 160 over 110, Elizabeth murmured. "This is too high. We have to keep her calm." "Do you have any medication in your carry-on?" she asked Simone. "I have some emergency nitrates and aspirin," Simone gasped. "But—" She gestured weakly to the overhead bin where her bag was stored. Elizabeth motioned to one of the male passengers. "Please, can you help get her bag down?" He nodded, unfastening his seatbelt and carefully retrieving Simone's carry-on. Elizabeth rummaged through it, guided by Simone's faint instructions, finally extracting a small zippered pouch containing medication. Simone managed to swallow an aspirin. She was about to place a nitrate tablet under her tongue when Charlotte intervened. "Wait," Charlotte said abruptly. "We shouldn't administer any medication without approval from a flight supervisor." Elizabeth bristled, turning toward Charlotte with a scathing look. "I am a licensed physician. I don't need approval from a flight supervisor to give a passenger medication, especially if they're her own prescriptions." "Don't you see the urgency here?" Charlotte looked unsettled, almost insulted. "I'm just doing my job," she muttered. Simone's hand shook as she placed the nitrate under her tongue, ignoring the flight attendant's hesitation. She felt a cool rush of relief as the medication dissolved, but the underlying alarm in her body remained. Why is she resisting? Simone wondered in dismay. Can she not see how serious this is? The question went unanswered, but the tension was clear. The flight attendant seemed oddly reluctant to fully mobilize. Was it a matter of procedure? Or was it something more insidious, unconscious bias? The assumption that a black woman couldn't possibly be a renowned surgeon, or might be exaggerating her complaint. As time dragged on, Dr. Davenport remained steadfastly by Simone's side, helping monitor her vitals. Charlotte and Rodney retreated to the galley, whispering with furrowed brows. Simone tried to ignore them, focusing on steadying her breath. She could feel the nitrates taking mild effect, easing the crushing sensation in her chest, but the headache and dizziness persisted. Eventually, a new face joined them, the purser, a woman in her late 40s with a crisp uniform and a more authoritative presence. She introduced herself as Tanya Harlow, the cabin services director. "I've been informed we have a passenger in distress," she said, glancing over Simone. "How are you feeling, ma'am?" Simone drew in a ragged breath. "I'm stable, but in considerable pain, Doctor. Davenport here has been helping me, but I need consistent monitoring, and if this escalates, We may need to consider an emergency landing. Tanya looked concerned, but remained composed. We'll speak to the captain. Meanwhile, let's keep her comfortable and continue providing oxygen. Simone closed her eyes as another wave of dizziness hit. She felt Dr. Davenport's reassuring hand on her shoulder. Despite the mask, Simone's breaths came short and rapid, her body tensing involuntarily. She tried to focus on the doctor's voice, on the count of her heartbeat. Tanya turned to Dr. Davenport. Could you fill out a medical incident form? We need documentation for everything we do here. Our airline takes liability very seriously. Elizabeth pursed her lips. Yes, I can, but the priority is the passenger's well-being right now. Also, if her condition worsens, I strongly advise diverting the flight. She's showing signs that could lead to a cardiac event. Tanya seemed to weigh Elizabeth's words. I'll inform the captain. We do have protocols. We have to consider the distance to the nearest airport and passenger safety. But of course, the captain will make the final call. Simone tried to speak but only managed a weak rasp. Elizabeth placed a gentle hand on her arm, signaling her to rest. Outside the immediate circle, the rumour mill on the plane churned. Some passengers were sympathetic, others looked annoyed, perhaps dreading a flight delay or an unscheduled landing. A few, overhearing that Simone was a doctor herself, seemed puzzled. How could a doctor not manage her own medical condition? They failed to realize that in these moments, Simone wasn't a doctor, she was a patient fighting excruciating pain and fear. Farther back in economy class, a tall man with a thick beard, who had earlier introduced himself to seatmates as an off-duty paramedic, shifted uncomfortably. He stood up, craning his neck to see what was happening in business class. He caught Tanya's eye and waved to catch her attention. Tanya motioned for him to wait. He frowned but sat back down, eager to offer any help. Finally, Tanya returned from a brief conference with the cockpit. We're still over the Atlantic, she explained to Dr. Davenport and Simone. The captain is in contact with ground medical support. They advise continuing onboard treatment. We might consider diverting to Shannon Airport in Ireland if her vitals worsen, but for now, we'll hold our course. That's the decision. Elizabeth's jaw tightened. I understand the complexities, but if she has a heart attack mid-flight, it could be catastrophic. Simone opened her eyes, forcing herself to speak despite the pressure in her chest. I trust your judgment, Dr. Davenport. If you think we need to land, please push for it. Before Elizabeth could respond, Charlotte returned, an odd mix of impatience and forced empathy coloring her face. We're keeping an eye on you, ma'am, she told Simone, but you should try to remain calm. Stress can make things worse. Simone took in the patronizing tone, feeling anger stir in her chest. I am trying, she breathed, but it's not exactly easy. Charlotte offered a tight-lipped smile. Is there anything else you need? A wave of frustration swept through Simone. I need to not be patronized, she wanted to say, but she bit her tongue. Instead, she shook her head weakly. Minutes ticked by, turning into an hour. Simone remained in pain, though the oxygen and initial medication had prevented a full-blown collapse. Dr. Davenport never left her side, calmly checking her pulse, blood pressure, and oxygen saturation. Yet Simone grew drowsy, her head spinning, the cabin lights growing painfully bright against her eyelids. Meanwhile, passengers couldn't help but notice the commotion. Whispers circulated that a woman was faking a condition to get attention. Others blamed the airline for not acting quickly enough. Some demanded the plane divert, while others grumbled about the inconvenience. Racial undertones floated in hushed remarks, questions about whether the staff would have acted differently if the patient had been a different race, or if she had introduced herself more aggressively as a high-profile surgeon. Seated behind Simone, an elderly British couple argued softly. "Oh, I do hope she's all right," said the wife, peering over the seat, eyes wide with concern. Poor thing. Her husband shrugged. Well, they did say she's a doctor. She should know how to handle it. This is rather inconvenient for the rest of us, though. The wife glared at him. Don't be so unkind. If she needs medical attention, she needs it. People can't just will themselves healthy. Across the aisle, the businessman reading his journal occasionally glanced at Simone with an inscrutable expression. He'd overheard snippets that Simone was a surgeon, but given the skeptical stance of the flight crew, he, too, wondered if there was more to the story. As the flight wore on, Dr. Davenport gently coaxed Simone to stay awake, worried that drifting into unconsciousness might signal a downturn. I need you to keep talking to me, she said softly. Tell me about your work. Simone managed a fragile smile behind the oxygen mask. Reconstructive surgery, helping burn victims, accident survivors. Her words were clipped, breathless. I was heading home to operate on a teenage girl. She had an accident. Elizabeth nodded encouragingly, glancing at the short note she'd jotted on the airline's medical incident form. You're from Johns Hopkins, right? Simone closed her eyes and nodded. Yes, did my fellowship there. Named department head 3 years ago. Dr. Davenport's eyes widened a fraction. She turned to Charlotte, who hovered nearby, arms crossed. She's not just any doctor. She's a surgeon at Johns Hopkins, one of the world's top facilities. This is serious. Charlotte's expression remained bland, as if unimpressed. Yes, we know, the captain still wants to continue to our destination. He's consulted with our medical ground crew. They believe if we keep her stable, we should be able to get her to a hospital once we land. Elizabeth exhaled sharply, but she withheld further protest for the moment, focusing on Simone's care. As the cabin lights dimmed for the nighttime portion of the flight, Simone felt her body fighting between exhaustion and the will to stay conscious. She coughed, her throat raw. The oxygen mask felt suffocating, paradoxically, even though she needed it. Each minute that passed reminded her how vulnerable she was in the air. She'd been the towering figure of authority in operating rooms around the globe, but here she was at the mercy of an airline's protocol and staff who seemed strangely uncooperative. A creeping sense of dread took hold. If her condition worsened, would the crew properly administer life-saving interventions? Would Dr. Davenport's efforts be enough at 30,000 feet without the right equipment? The thought gnawed at Simone's mind, intensifying the throb in her temples. A few more hours crawled by. Simone oscillated between moments of relative calm and crushing tightness in her chest. Several times, Dr. Davenport flagged down the attendants for more water or medication checks, each time greeted with lukewarm cooperation. Then, abruptly, Simone's breath caught in her throat, like a vise constricted around her lungs. She gasped sharply, the oxygen mask pressing tight against her face. Alarmed, Dr. Davenport pulled out her stethoscope. She had found it in her own carry-on. She placed it against Simone's chest, listening intently. Concern clouded Elizabeth's face. Your heart rate is spiking. I'm worried about arrhythmia, she said tensely. Let me check your oxygen saturation. Charlotte had lingered near. Is everything all right? She asked flatly. Elizabeth shot her a glance. No. She's going into a more dangerous phase. I need immediate assistance from the crew. We should prepare for the possibility of an emergency landing. Charlotte's lips thinned. She nodded curtly and walked to the cockpit once again. The next 15 minutes felt agonizing as Simone's heart rate soared in her chest. Elizabeth administered another dose of her medication, and Simone coughed violently, sweat beading across her brow. Rodney, the other attendant, reappeared to check the overhead compartments. He fumbled with the first aid kit, ensuring everything was in order. Then he approached Simone with a forced smile. How are we feeling? She's not well, Elizabeth snapped, exasperation evident in her tone. Have you told the pilot we need to land as soon as possible? Rodney pressed his lips together. The pilot is in touch with ground control. We still have 2 hours to the nearest viable diversion. We'll do what we can until then. Simone's mind felt hazy, but she recognized the gravity of the situation. 2 hours was an eternity for someone experiencing a potential cardiac event. Despite her profession, she felt fear gnaw at the edges of her sanity. Scenes of all the patients she'd tried to save flashed through her mind. She recalled the comfort she gave them, the assurance that they were in good hands. Now, ironically, she realized how terrifying it was to rely on others for your own survival, especially when you felt they weren't giving you their all. Doctor Davenport opened Simone's carry-on once more, checking if there was anything else that might help. "You have some anti-anxiety meds here," she noted. "It might help bring your heart rate down, but the bigger problem is potential arrhythmia. We really need a defibrillator ready." She turned to Rodney. "Where is the AED? Let's have it by her seat. If her heart goes into arrest, every second will matter." Rodney blanched, then nodded. He quickly retrieved the small unit. Dr. Davenport carefully set it near Simone's seat. The presence of the AED was a sobering reminder that every breath Simone took might be one step away from a life-threatening collapse. Further back in the cabin, the off-duty paramedic named Thomas Jackson watched the flurry in business class with growing concern. He couldn't see everything clearly, but from the overhead announcements and the occasional glimpses of Dr. Davenport's frantic gestures, he sensed an escalating emergency. Finally, unable to stay quiet, he rose and approached the business class curtain. A flight attendant tried to intercept him. "Sir, please remain in your seat," she said, voice clipped. Thomas shook his head firmly. "I'm a paramedic. I'm not going to stand by if someone's in distress. I might be able to help." Tanya Harlow, the cabin services director, overheard the exchange and approached. "Sir, we have a doctor attending to her," she said, trying to remain calm. "Then let me coordinate with that doctor," Thomas insisted, not unkindly. "I'm trained in emergency protocols. I can at least offer an extra set of hands. On the ground, I respond to heart attacks, strokes, all sorts of emergencies." Tanya hesitated, glancing around as if worried about losing control. Then, perhaps realizing she needed to do everything possible, she nodded reluctantly. "All right, follow me." Thomas approached Simone's seat. Elizabeth looked up, relief evident. "Are you medically trained?" she asked. Thomas nodded quickly. "I'm a paramedic with the Baltimore City Fire Department. Let me help." At the mention of Baltimore City, Simone's eyes flickered open. She tried to form a grateful smile. This was someone from home, from her own city. The thought comforted her, though she remained in agony. Thomas kneeled beside Elizabeth, who filled him in rapidly. Simone's heart rate was dangerously high. She was experiencing chest tightness, shortness of breath, and possible arrhythmia. They had oxygen in place and the AED nearby. Simone had a partial history of migraines, but no known heart conditions. She'd taken aspirin and nitrates. Thomas took Simone's wrist to feel her pulse. "She's cold," he observed. "Her circulation might be compromised." Elizabeth nodded. "I'm pushing for an emergency landing, but the crew..." Thomas shot a quick, frustrated look at Tanya, who lingered behind them. "We're about 2 hours away from an airport, right?" "That's too long if she goes into full arrest," Tanya sighed. "I'm sorry. The decision is with the pilot and ground control." Thomas inhaled deeply, trying not to lose his cool. "All right, let's keep her as stable as possible." He rummaged through the first aid kit, verifying that adrenaline syringes and other crucial medications were present, but it was a limited kit meant for basic emergencies, not advanced life support at altitude. Simone tried to speak, her voice muffled by the oxygen mask. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're both a godsend." Elizabeth offered a reassuring smile. "We'll do our best, Dr. Aldridge." Thomas nodded, placing a comforting hand on Simone's shoulder. "We've got you," he said quietly. Nearby, Charlotte watched the scene with a faint frown. Simone could sense the woman's tension, as though she was still unconvinced or bothered by the entire ordeal. Yet a passenger's potential heart failure should have triggered universal concern. Simone's heart sank at the realization that prejudice or indifference might be overshadowing genuine empathy. An hour later, the plane hit mild turbulence. Simone felt each jolt like a shock to her already frazzled nerves. Her chest had eased marginally, but she remained extremely weak, cycling between intense dizziness and barely managed stability. Dr. Davenport and Thomas took turns checking her vitals, applying cold compresses, and talking her through slow, measured breaths. Then, without warning, Simone's vision went dark. She slumped back in her seat, her body going limp. Alarms blared in Elizabeth's mind. She shook Simone gently, calling her name, but Simone's eyes rolled back. "Get the AED ready," Elizabeth shouted, her voice carrying above the hum of the engines. Thomas activated the device, pressing electrode pads onto Simone's chest beneath her blazer and blouse. The machine began its automated assessment. Analyzing heart rhythm, "Do not touch the patient," the robotic voice intoned. Passengers who had been discreetly observing erupted in gasps and murmurs. The machine beeped, shock advised. "Charging." "Oh God," Elizabeth muttered, her stomach twisting. She motioned everyone away. "Clear." Thomas stepped back, heart pounding. A jolt of electricity surged through Simone's body, causing her to arch momentarily. Dr. Davenport and Thomas hovered, hearts in their throats. The AED announced, "Analyzing heart rhythm. Stand by." Simone remained unresponsive, her face ashen. Elizabeth swiftly started compressions, counting aloud. Thomas monitored the AED. Beads of sweat rolled down Elizabeth's forehead as she pushed against Simone's sternum. "Come on, come on," Thomas whispered, positioning himself to relieve Elizabeth if she tired. But she continued with fierce determination, each compression delivered with a surgeon's precision. After what felt like an eternity, the machine announced, "No shock advised. Continue CPR." Thomas took over compressions while Elizabeth leaned close to Simone's mouth, listening for breath. Simone's lips were parted beneath the oxygen mask, which had been pushed aside to perform CPR. Elizabeth ordered Charlotte to grab a bag valve mask from the emergency kit, if available. The flight attendant hesitated, rummaging through the kit before handing it over with shaky hands. Elizabeth attached it to Simone's face, squeezing air into her lungs in a steady rhythm. Suddenly Simone coughed, her chest heaving. Thomas halted compressions, and Elizabeth quickly checked for a pulse. "She's got a pulse," she announced, relief flooding her voice. "She's back." Simone's eyes fluttered open, tears pricking at the corners. She gasped, the oxygen mask replaced over her mouth. Disoriented, she blinked, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The pain lingered, but she was alive. A wave of stunned silence swept the cabin, relief mingled with shock. Charlotte and Rodney looked visibly shaken, perhaps realizing how close to death Simone had come. Tanya stared, trembling slightly, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. Elizabeth inhaled a ragged breath. "We have to land now," she demanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. "No more delays." Tanya nodded vigorously, as if awakened from a trance. "Yes, I'll inform the cockpit at once. We'll divert." The pilot made an immediate announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical emergency on board. We will be diverting to the nearest airport for the safety of our passenger. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened as we begin our descent." The plane banked, changing course. Passengers reacted with hushed tension, some fearful, some relieved that help was on the way. For Simone, every second of descent felt painfully slow. She drifted in and out of consciousness, the oxygen mask pressed to her face, Dr. Davenport holding her hand. Thomas monitoring her vitals. After what seemed an interminable period of circling, the plane finally touched down at Shannon Airport in Ireland. Paramedics and airport medical staff were already waiting on the tarmac, having been alerted by the cockpit. The cabin erupted in a flurry of activity as the doors opened and paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. Simone's eyes fluttered open long enough to see the concerned faces of her rescuers. "Doctor." Davenport quickly briefed the paramedics on Simone's condition. Thomas hovered, checking if he could assist, but the Irish paramedics took charge with swift professionalism. As Simone was carefully lifted onto the stretcher, Charlotte hovered near, still pale. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, though Simone was too weak to respond. The flight attendant's words were drowned out by the hustle of paramedics, securing Simone for transport. Dr. Davenport held Simone's hand. "I'll come with you if that's all right," she told the paramedics. They nodded, grateful for her continuity of care information. Before leaving the cabin, Elizabeth cast a sharp look at Tanya, Charlotte, and Rodney. "You almost cost this woman her life with your hesitations. I hope your airline does some soul searching about how you handle medical emergencies and how you treat people," she said curtly. Then she followed the stretcher down the aisle. Inside the ambulance, sirens blared as they raced to the nearest hospital. Simone drifted in and out, only faintly aware of the professional bustle around her. Tubes were attached, and the fourth line started. Monitors beeped steadily. She felt a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that blurred reality. She clung to the knowledge that she was finally in a real medical facility's care. It was nearly 2 days before Simone fully came to in a quiet hospital room. The stinging brightness of the fluorescent lights overhead made her squint, and the sterile smell of disinfectant filled her nose. She blinked, trying to recall where she was. The last clear memory was the plane, the oxygen mask, Dr. Davenport's face. A soft beeping near her bed alerted her to the various machines monitoring her vitals. Her chest felt sore, and the fourth line was taped to her forearm. A nurse noticed her stirring and hurried over, a gentle smile on her face. "Good afternoon, Dr. Aldridge. You gave everyone quite a scare," the nurse said, her Irish lilt calm and soothing. "How are you feeling?" Simone swallowed, her throat dry. "Thirsty," she managed. The nurse promptly provided a small cup of water with a straw, which Simone sipped gratefully. Memories of the flight flooded back: the dismissive flight attendants, the intense chest pains, the electric shock from the AED. She closed her eyes, gratitude washing over her that she was still alive. After a few minutes, Dr. Davenport entered the room, still in the clothes she'd worn on the flight, now wrinkled. Her hair was disheveled, but her expression was one of immense relief. "Simone, you're awake. Thank goodness." She carefully approached the bed. "How do you feel?" "Better," Simone said, her voice hoarse. "Thank you. You saved my life." She tried to sit up, grimacing as the movement tugged at her chest and abdomen. Elizabeth gently guided Simone's pillow to support her. The local cardiologist here ran tests. "You had a dangerous arrhythmia, triggered by a combination of stress, possible dehydration, and maybe an undiagnosed heart condition. They're still running further tests, but you're stable now." Simone's mind spun. She had always been so focused on saving others, she never paused to imagine she might have a ticking time bomb in her own chest. "I can't believe this happened. I'm so used to being on the other side, the one with the scalpel, not the one on the table." Elizabeth patted her hand. "Life can be ironic, but we're just glad you pulled through." They talked a bit about the flight, how Thomas assisted, how the plane had finally diverted. Simone tensed when she recalled the crew's initial response. "They almost let me die," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "They waited so long to take me seriously." Elizabeth nodded, empathy shining in her gaze. "I'm sorry you had to endure that." I don't know if it was ignorance, bias, or just poor training, but I filed a formal complaint. The airline is already under scrutiny. Word travels fast when a high-profile passenger nearly dies. Simone sighed, leaning back into her pillow. High-profile passenger, she repeated. That's what it took. Someone recognized my position. This shouldn't happen to anyone, doctor or not. Elizabeth agreed softly. You're right, it shouldn't, but it does. Hopefully, your ordeal will force some changes. The next day, Simone received a surprise. The story had leaked to international news outlets. Reports circulated about a Johns Hopkins surgeon who was ignored by airline staff until she went into cardiac arrest. A local Irish paper had done a brief piece, and then major US outlets picked it up. Social media hashtags sprang forth, decrying racial bias and negligence by airline crews. Simone sat propped up in bed, reading on a tablet Dr. Davenport had lent her. Dozens of messages poured in from colleagues, friends, and even strangers offering support. Hashtags like #ListenToBlackWomen trended, calling attention to the perceived prejudice Simone had experienced. A hospital administrator, flanked by a small press team, asked Simone for permission to speak publicly about her condition. She declined, not wanting her medical details broadcast. Still, the story of her near-death experience was out there, fueling discussions on talk shows and morning news segments. Her phone pinged non-stop with interview requests. She ignored them for now. Her health took priority. Meanwhile, the airline faced a public relations crisis. Their official statement offered a lukewarm apology, stating that all protocols were followed and that they regretted any inconvenience. In a subsequent interview on CNN, a spokesperson avoided direct answers, only fueling public anger. Simone's closest friends and her family bombarded the hospital's phone lines, desperate for updates. She eventually asked Dr. Davenport to help arrange a conference call so she could reassure everyone she was stable. It comforted Simone to hear their voices, but she also felt a pang of guilt. Her mother, who had always feared Simone's grueling schedule, now wept with relief. The doctors at Shannon Hospital recommended a thorough battery of tests to pinpoint the cause of her arrhythmia and to ensure no permanent damage. Simone braced for the possibility that she might need a pacemaker or medication regimen. It was a humbling thought, drastically altering her perspective on her own mortality. 3 days after she was admitted, Simone was cleared for light activity. Dr. Davenport wheeled her outside to a small garden at the hospital's rear, where they could get fresh air. The Irish drizzle had paused, leaving behind a crisp coolness. Simone inhaled deeply, grateful simply to be breathing without pain. As they sat on a bench, a hospital administrator approached. "Dr. Aldridge, Dr. Davenport, there's someone here from the airline. They've asked to speak with you." "Should I send them away?" Simone exchanged a look with Elizabeth. "No, let them come," she said quietly. "I want to hear what they have to say." Moments later, a suited man in his early 50s walked up, accompanied by a stern-looking woman. They introduced themselves as high-ranking representatives of the airline's corporate office. "We wanted to express our sincere apologies for what happened on flight BA 4721, the man began, his voice meticulously polished. "We've launched an internal investigation to understand any gaps in our procedures." Simone nodded, her posture rigid. "I nearly died. I hope your gaps get fixed before it costs someone else their life." He cleared his throat. "We are deeply grateful to Dr. Davenport and the paramedic who assisted. We want to cover all your medical expenses here and provide additional compensation for the distress." Elizabeth bristled slightly. "This isn't about money, it's about accountability. Have you addressed the attitudes and actions of your staff?" The woman stepped in. All crew members involved in this incident have been placed on temporary suspension pending the investigation's outcome. Sensitivity and emergency training are being re-evaluated. We understand there may have been cultural or personal biases at play. Simone met her gaze. I'm not out for anyone's job, but I can't ignore how poorly they treated me until I nearly died. If they had followed standard emergency protocols, we might have diverted earlier, and I might not have gone into cardiac arrest at 30,000 feet. The man nodded solemnly. We will address it. We promise. Our reputation is on the line, but more importantly, passenger safety is paramount. We'll be transparent with our findings. Simone exhaled, feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. Fine, she said, but remember, I'm only one person. There are countless others who don't have my resources or visibility. Make changes for them, not just for me. The representatives nodded, then politely excused themselves. After they left, Simone leaned back, letting the cool breeze wash over her. Calmer, she murmured. They're dealing with a PR nightmare. But it's not enough. I want real change, or at least a real conversation. Elizabeth placed a hand on Simone's shoulder. And maybe this conversation has already started, she said softly. Over the next week, Simone recovered steadily. News of her ordeal continued to circulate, garnering widespread outrage. Civil rights organizations reached out to show support, citing her experience as yet another example of how Black women often aren't taken seriously when they report medical symptoms. Women of color across social media platforms shared stories of having their pain dismissed by medical professionals. When Simone felt strong enough, she agreed to one interviewer sit down with a respected BBC journalist who had requested to speak with her while she was still in Ireland. The hospital arranged a small conference room for the broadcast. Seated in a wheelchair, Simone appeared on camera with the faint lines of fatigue etched on her face. She spoke candidly about the excruciating fear she felt and the humiliating sense of being disregarded. She mentioned Dr. Davenport, Thomas the paramedic, and the Irish medical team who ultimately saved her life. It's not just about me, Simone told the interviewer, her voice steady. It's about the systemic bias that can exist anywhere, even in the skies. If you suspect someone's having a heart attack, you do everything you can to help. You don't second-guess their credibility because of their gender or race. Seconds matter. I want people to understand this isn't a rare occurrence. It's a symptom of something deeper. After the broadcast, messages of solidarity poured in. Some viewers disclosed their own traumatic incidents of being overlooked in emergencies. Others offered hope, praising Simone's courage for speaking out. The journalist's piece went viral, sparking renewed debate on airline protocols and the broader issue of racial and gender bias. 2 weeks after the emergency, Simone was finally cleared to fly again, though under strict medical advice not to exert herself. Dr. Davenport had extended her stay in Ireland, insisting on personally accompanying Simone back to the United States to ensure her safety. They boarded a different airline this time. Simone refused to travel with the original one until changes were demonstrably made. The flight home was uneventful, and the crew treated Simone with heightened attention and care, possibly recognizing her from the news. When the plane landed at Baltimore-Washington International Airport, Simone felt an unexpected rush of emotion. She was home. Despite her weakness, she yearned to return to her hospital, to see the colleagues who had been worried sick about her. But for now, rest took priority. A car service brought her and Dr. Davenport to her townhouse in a quiet Baltimore neighborhood. To Simone's surprise, waiting at her door was Thomas Jackson, the off-duty paramedic from the flight, holding a small bouquet of flowers. Thomas grinned sheepishly. Heard you were coming home. Wanted to see how you were doing. I also have a cousin at the hospital who said the staff might want to greet you soon. Simone's eyes misted. Thank you. This is so thoughtful. You and Elizabeth saved my life. I'll never forget it. Thomas waved off the praise. I just did what I'm trained to do. You're the one who fights for people every day in the operating room. Elizabeth beamed. We're all just glad you're still here to do it. They helped Simone settle inside, placing her suitcases near the door. The townhouse felt warm, inviting. Photos of her family and framed awards adorned the walls, testaments to her remarkable career. Gazing at them, Simone felt a blend of pride and humility. She had almost left this world abruptly, her life cut short by an arrhythmic heartbeat on an airplane far from home. Over the next few weeks, Simone rested and underwent further evaluation at Johns Hopkins. To her relief, the specialists concluded that her arrhythmia, while serious, could be managed with medication and lifestyle adjustments. She'd need to monitor her heart carefully, especially under stress, but she was expected to make a full recovery. Yet returning to work wasn't immediate. Her colleagues insisted she take time to heal. Meanwhile, the teenage patient she'd been scheduled to operate on had successfully undergone surgery by one of Simone's trusted peers. The girl was doing well, which comforted Simone greatly. In her downtime, Simone began journaling about her ordeal, capturing every nuanced emotion, the fear, the anger, the frustration at being overlooked. She also noted the silver linings: Dr. Davenport's unwavering dedication, Thomas's willingness to step in, the supportive medical team in Ireland, and the outpouring of empathy from the public. Her story had sparked broader discussions in the medical community about how to address unconscious bias. Hospital boards and medical conferences requested that Simone speak on patient advocacy from the perspective of a provider turned patient. Initially hesitant, Simone decided her experience could serve a greater purpose. Within months, she stood on stage at a global health symposium, not as a keynote speaker on reconstructive surgery, but on patient rights and racial bias in emergency care. She recounted her harrowing flight, the near-fatal delay, and how even a top surgeon could be dismissed. Attendees listened, rapt, applauding thunderously when she finished. News broke that Charlotte, Rodney, and Tanya, the three crew members who had hesitated to help Simone, faced serious repercussions. Internal investigations found that they had failed to follow emergency protocols, leading to a formal censure. Charlotte and Rodney were fired, while Tanya was demoted. The airline issued a more detailed public apology, acknowledging that prejudice might have played a role in the delayed response. They announced a partnership with civil rights groups to improve training and address biases head-on. At first, Simone felt a grim sense of satisfaction. It seemed like justice. But as the dust settled, she remembered her own vow that this should be about systemic change, not punishing individuals alone. She reached out through her lawyer, expressing that she hoped the airline would invest in comprehensive training rather than simply blaming 3 staff members. She wanted to ensure that no future passenger, regardless of status or race, would endure a similar ordeal. Nevertheless, the crew's dismissive behavior had had harsh consequences. Charlotte, once so dismissive, found herself blacklisted from many airlines after the scandal. Rodney's career took a hit. He struggled to find another job in the industry. Tanya, whose decades of service ended in demotion, quietly resigned, unable to face the shame. It was a stark reminder that prejudice, even unconscious, can destroy not just victims' lives, but those who harbor it as well. Karma had indeed come swiftly. Months turned into a year. Simone fully recovered, returning to her surgical duties with renewed vigor. She resumed complex operations, saving lives daily at Johns Hopkins. But something had changed within her. She added a new dimension to her career, an advocacy for equitable treatment in healthcare. She volunteered her time to speak at community forums, urging individuals to trust their instincts when they felt ill, to demand care and refuse to be dismissed. Her story remained a topic in medical ethics classes and airline training programs alike. Crew ignores black woman's medical emergency, then discover she's a world-renowned surgeon had become a cautionary headline. Airlines worldwide revamped their training, emphasizing the importance of taking every passenger's medical complaint seriously. Over time, Simone's ordeal turned into a catalyst for tangible change, sparing others from the brink of disaster. Whenever she reflected on that fateful flight, Simone felt a surge of gratitude for Dr. Davenport, Thomas, and the medical staff who refused to dismiss her cries for help. She also felt sorrow for the flight crew members who lost their careers. The memory of ignoring a critical patient, a patient they believed was exaggerating, would haunt them. On her desk at home, Simone kept a small plaque engraved with the words, "I was saved to save others again." It was a daily reminder that, though she had faced a brush with death at 30,000 feet, she emerged with a second chance, a chance to continue her life's work and champion a cause larger than surgery alone. And so her story stood, a tale of prejudice, near tragedy and ultimate redemption. She never asked for the spotlight, but it found her, and she used it to light a path toward empathy, fairness, and life-saving vigilance for all. Thank you for joining me on this harrowing journey of survival and transformation, where a seemingly routine flight nearly became Dr. Simone Aldridge's last. From the moment she was dismissed by the flight crew, despite her cries for help, to the heart-stopping seconds of cardiac arrest at 30,000 feet, this story reveals the life or death consequences of bias and inaction. And yet, within the same cabin, hope and heroism emerged from individuals like Dr. Davenport and Thomas the paramedic, reminding us that a single act of compassion can overturn a storm of indifference. Ultimately, Dr. Aldridge's plight became a call to action, driving policy changes in aviation and championing equitable medical care. If you found value or inspiration in this story, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. By spreading this message, you help ensure that empathy, fairness, and vigilance remain at the forefront so no one's cries for help ever go unheard. Thank you.